The lie was wearing thin, and I could feel it like a cheap suit in July. Every movement, a reminder that it didn't quite fit, that the seams were straining. It wasn't the kind of lie people tell to spare feelings or smooth, rough edges. This one was engineered, deliberate, a tool. The kind you use when you want to shift weight off your own shoulders and onto someone else's spine. It had started innocently enough, or at least that's how they sold it. A misplaced set of keys left on the wrong hook. A missed lunch because I'd written the time down wrong. A forgotten appointment that, in truth, had never been put on my calendar in the first place. Each incident was catalogued, remembered, repeated. Each one became a brick in a wall they were quietly building around me. Over time, the wall turned into a story, and the story hardened into a diagnosis. Nathan Hale is fading. I watched them from a table near the back of the Crestview Country Club ballroom, the epicenter of my daughter Lila's annual family networking reunion. The name alone was a masterstroke of camouflage. It sounded wholesome, almost charming, but everyone in the room understood its real function. It was a marketplace. Influence traded hands in smiles and handshakes, futures sketched out over cocktails, alliances formed under the soft glow of rented chandeliers. I sat where the staff traffic was heaviest, half-shadowed by a fake palm, close enough to hear fragments of conversations, but far enough to be ignored. 52 years old. Not ancient. My joints still worked. My mind certainly did. Yes, there was gray at my temples, and yes, I wore plain, comfortable clothes, soft slacks, a collared shirt without a logo, shoes built for standing instead of strutting. To them, it read as semi-retired, harmless, background noise. I had chosen it carefully, a deliberate tactical error, or so they thought. Lila moved through the room with practiced ease, all polished angles and calibrated warmth. At 31, she had perfected the art of seeming interested in everyone while committing to no one. Her silk sheath dress caught the light every time she turned, the fabric whispering success and discipline. People leaned toward her, not the other way around. She made them feel selected. Her husband, Tom Whitaker, stayed a half step behind, the way men like him always do when they want to project support without surrendering control. Tom observed more than he spoke, his eyes constantly measuring, indexing reactions. When he leaned in to whisper something to Lila, it was never a joke. It was an instruction, a correction, a reminder of the script. Tom was the coordinator of the betrayal, though he would never have used that word. In his mind, he was managing risk. He loved the phrase, "I'm just worried about the old man," used it like a hall pass whenever anyone questioned his motives. Concern as camouflage. Greed dressed as stewardship. My son Evan was subtler only in his own imagination. At 29, he had the sharp edges of someone who believed time itself was a resource he was entitled to spend aggressively. Corporate ambition had scrubbed away whatever softness he might once have had, leaving behind efficiency and impatience in equal measure. He approached my table with his wife, Rebecca Moore, whose eyes flicked immediately to the glass in my hand. Cheap Merlot, chosen intentionally from the bottom of the menu. Her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Rebecca's life was a curated feed of optics and outcomes. Everything was about presentation. She was financially dependent on Evan's climb, and she knew it. A fading father-in-law didn't fit the image she was building, didn't photograph well in her mind. "Dad," Evan said, the word flattened by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You okay back here? Getting enough air?" Just enough concern to be performative. Just enough volume for nearby ears. "Just fine, Evan," I replied, setting my glass down with care. My voice was level, almost dull, the way it gets when I don't want to give anyone anything to work with. Marveling at the sheer volume of polite insincerity in one room, it's truly a metropolitan phenomenon. Rebecca let out a titter that sounded like glass beads skittering across marble. "Oh, Nathan, always the observer, aren't you?" "It's the job," I said, and left it there. Evan exhaled, a sigh practiced in front of mirrors. He was angling towards something, rehearsed and ready, eager to deliver the small humiliation he'd been polishing all evening. Speaking of that, I ran into Mr. Henderson from Sterling Energy earlier. He asked me what you're up to these days. I didn't fill the silence for him. I never had. "I told him you were retired mostly," Evan continued. "Still doing that old job." He weighted the last two words carefully, wrapping them in a tone of gentle dismissal that suggested nostalgia more than relevance. I felt the familiar heat rise, controlled and contained, a pressure source I'd learned to use rather than vent. "And what exactly is my old job again, Evan?" He waved a hand, vague and careless, as if the last quarter century of my life could be summarized with a gesture. "The security thing, the crisis stuff. Seems a bit obsolete, doesn't it? Everything's software now, Dad. No more boots on the ground." Boots on the ground. As if that phrase hadn't kept factories running, cities lit, hospitals operational when systems failed and plans dissolved. Rebecca leaned in, her expression all wide eyes and curated pity. "It's sweet you keep up with the past, Nathan, but the market has shifted. Evan just secured a massive contract for his firm. They're building out the new East Wing at St. Jude's Hospital. It's all about cutting-edge tech security." There it was. The hook set cleanly, the portrait complete. A man clinging to an irrelevant past, indulged out of politeness, managed for appearances. I could feel the faint ripple of laughter from the group they'd just left, a collective chuckle at the expense of the obsolete professional who didn't quite know when to exit the stage. Let them laugh, I thought, lifting the glass and taking a slow, measured sip. It's procedural, not personal. Emotion clouds judgment. Procedure wins. I excused myself with a nod and a comment about needing fresh air, playing the part they'd written for me. The parking garage below was a different world. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting hard reflections off polished concrete. The air was cold and still, stripped of perfume and pretense. No music, no laughter, just structure. I pulled out my phone, not the burner they assumed I used, the one they thought they'd identified and monitored. This was the other one, the one they didn't know existed, hardened, encrypted, built to run satellite protocols when terrestrial networks failed. Old-fashioned, perhaps, in the same way gravity is old-fashioned. They had been sloppy, arrogant. Success has a way of making people careless, especially when they believe the person they're exploiting is already diminished. Evan's real estate connections, Lila's access to my financial management software, access I had granted years ago when I taught them how to manage their digital lives responsibly, had been leveraged quietly, small, legal roadblocks placed with surgical precision. I opened the document I'd downloaded 2 days earlier from a shared cloud folder I had set up long before any of them understood permissions, redundancy, or audit trails. The title was almost insulting in its blandness: Estate Access Review, 2025. They hadn't just removed me from emergency contact roles. They'd redirected my access permissions to the family cottage up north, citing recent memory issues as justification. A phrase lifted straight from a template. Worse, they'd initiated a preliminary review for a guardianship petition, covert, preliminary, designed to feel exploratory rather than aggressive. Tom's background in low-level legal compliance showed in the paperwork. It looked legitimate at a glance. Sloppy only if you knew where to look. They believed I wouldn't notice. That I was too distracted, too slow, too busy reminiscing about the past. I noticed everything. There was no point in confronting them. Arguments feed narratives. Denials strengthen suspicion. I couldn't dismantle their story by insisting it was false. I could only destroy it by replacing it with a reality so undeniable, so physical and public, that their version would collapse under its own weight. I reached the last line of the guardianship draft, where Lila referred to me as currently non-compliant with basic asset management protocol. It hurt anyway, not because it was cruel, but because it was calculated. The phone vibrated in my hand. The burner. Secured line. ID blocked. I answered on the first ring. "Hale," I said. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, edged with pressure. "Nathan, it's Harrison. We have a green light on the St. Jude contract. Full-scale, multi-facility oversight. East Wing expansion plus the adjacent industrial utilities complex. They want an unannounced security and logistics overhaul. End to end. Now." The internal switch flipped. The background noise dropped away. This was the space I knew, the language of urgency, constraints, and consequence. "I'll need the site plans immediately," I said, "and a full profile of every vested contractor, primary and secondary." There was a pause. Then Harrison's voice lowered. "Timing's tight. Lead real estate developer on the East Wing is Evan Hale's firm, your son's company." I smiled, slow and deliberate. Not from amusement, but from certainty. Controlled escalation requires patience, not anger. "Send me the package," I said. "I'll be on site by 0700. The call ended. The concrete floor reflected the lights above, clean and unyielding. The facility my children were so proud of, the symbol of their relevance, the proof they used to mock my obsolete work, was about to become my domain. I would be the invisible authority coordinating private security across the entire complex. They wouldn't know I was leading it. They wouldn't even know I knew. They needed me confident. They needed me distracted. They needed me to believe I was slow. The intersection points aligned almost too neatly. Evan's reputation was tied to the successful completion of the East Wing. Delays, compliance failures, or security oversights would echo through his firm's future. Lila's investment portfolio, which I'd glimpsed months earlier in a stray email she assumed I'd ignored, was leveraged against the long-term success of the St. Jude's expansion bond. Exposure there would ripple outward, quiet but devastating. I had leverage, legal, procedural, concealed, the kind that doesn't announce itself until the moment it's applied. The revelation would come later, precisely when it would do the most damage. I headed for the stairwell, leaving the country club's curated warmth behind. Each step upward felt lighter than the last. The air sharpened as I emerged outside, the night clear and cold. The stillness wasn't peace, it was readiness. The game they thought they were playing had just shifted phases, and they didn't even know the board had changed. Before we continue, hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We'd love to get to know our audience better. I spent the next 48 hours submerged in the St. Jude's contract, the way a diver sinks past the last scatter of light and into something colder, heavier, more precise. The documents weren't difficult. They were dense. Layers of security clearances nested inside logistics manifests. Emergency response protocols cross-referenced against local infrastructure contingencies. Private insurance riders threaded through municipal compliance requirements. It was a living organism disguised as paperwork, and I knew how to read its pulse. I established my temporary command center in a sterile, windowless office block nearly 15 miles from the main campus, leased under the hospital trust's security provisions. No signage, no foot traffic. The kind of place people forget exists the moment they leave it. I had learned long ago that proximity creates curiosity, and curiosity creates noise. I wanted neither. Every screen in the room was dedicated to a single function: access control, communications flow, contractor hierarchy, physical ingress and egress points, each one isolated, redundant, and logged. Evan's firm surfaced everywhere once I knew where to look. They were the spine of the project, responsible not only for architectural integrity, but also for access control during the final build-out phase, when vulnerabilities multiply and accountability blurs. Temporary badges, rotating crews, equipment moving at odd hours. It was the most dangerous stage of any facility's life, and Evan was treating it like a resume line. Lila's involvement was quieter, almost elegant. An obscure LLC, buried 2 shells deep, held a minority stake in long-term facilities management. On paper, it looked passive. In reality, it tied her reputation and future income directly to the project's smooth, uneventful opening. No incidents, no delays, no surprises. Stability was her currency. She had leveraged it beautifully, assuming no one would trace the thread back to her. My mandate from the hospital's private security trust was blunt in its simplicity. Stress test every vulnerability. Implement any change I deemed necessary. Coordinate a full-scale, unannounced industrial shutdown and emergency drill. I had full contractual authority over access, personnel, and physical security for the duration of the contract. No appeals, no courtesy notifications. For 96 hours, I was the legal axis everything turned on. Obsolete, harmless, irrelevant. Except I now held the emergency override for their entire professional world. I didn't start with grand gestures. That would have been sloppy. I started with leverage they had already handed me, wrapped neatly in their own arrogance. First, I downloaded the transcripts of the preliminary guardianship meeting, the one Lila and Tom had conducted with such careful language, such rehearsed concern. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was clinical, cold, procedural to the bone. Phrases like risk mitigation and best interests appeared with numbing regularity. My supposed decline was referenced the way one might reference a faulty appliance, inconvenient, potentially hazardous, in need of replacement or oversight. I archived it in 3 separate encrypted locations. This wasn't ammunition. It was exposure, the gossip layer. Private conversations meant to stay buried until they didn't. Next, I exercised my contractual authority to reroute the building's internal communication systems, not surveillance, nothing illegal. A temporary remapping of traffic through a secure node I controlled, justified under system stress testing and redundancy verification. Every meeting request, every internal message referencing the project, every access approval flowed through that node. I wasn't reading secrets, I was watching patterns. Patterns tell you everything people think they're hiding. The arrogance surfaced almost immediately. Casual, unfiltered. The way people speak when they believe the audience is friendly. I found a text exchange between Lila and Evan, less than a week old, discussing the cottage up north. Lila, he hasn't even noticed the deed change, sleeps through everything. Evan, told you. He's slow. Mom would have caught this instantly. The comparison landed exactly where they intended it to. Rebecca Moore chimed in on a separate thread, her contribution as superficial as it was revealing. Rebecca. Just wish he wouldn't wear those ugly sweaters to Evan's meetings. It looks so low class. Can't wait until the guardianship is formalized and we can quietly manage his wardrobe. Manage my wardrobe. Of course. The true emergency. I closed the file without comment, my inner voice a dry rasp of amusement. People always reveal their priorities when they think the battle is already won. Publicly, I maintained the image they needed me to maintain. I called Lila with vague questions about utility bills and investment statements, asked Evan whether a letter from the bank looked odd to him. I let my voice wander, inserted small pauses, misremembered a date or two. I played the role carefully, knowing restraint was the most convincing performance of all. Lila sighed dramatically over the phone, the sound engineered to signal patience. Dad, we handled it. Just focus on your relaxation, okay? Tom said he's going to check in on you later, just to make sure you're feeling centered. Centered, I repeated, letting the word settle. Sounds lovely. Tom Whitaker arrived the following evening, right on schedule. He brought a casserole I didn't ask for and wore the expression of a man convinced he was about to perform a kindness. He sat across from me in my kitchen, the same kitchen they had photographed and described in their guardianship filing as evidence of my uninspired, solitary existence. The room was clean, functional, quiet. It offended them that it didn't look like neglect. "Nathan," Tom began, leaning forward with his hands clasped, the posture of a mediator. "We just want what's best. Lila and Evan, they worry. They see you doing the same old routine. No social interaction, no forward momentum." I studied him as he spoke. The slight tension in his jaw, the way his foot tapped once and then stilled when he noticed it. He was used to controlling rooms, to shaping outcomes with tone and implication. He wasn't used to silence. "You think I need forward momentum, Tom?" I asked. "Professionally, financially, yes." He nodded, seizing on the opening. "Look, I'm just concerned. We all are. It would make things a lot easier for everyone if you would just sign over the remaining assets, relinquish control, and fade into comfortable irrelevance." I finished for him, my tone almost friendly. His eyes widened before he could stop them. The mask slipped for half a second, revealing genuine alarm. "Nathan, that's unfair. It's about managing risk." I stood, moved to the counter, and poured myself a cup of coffee. The simple act shifted the room's balance. "Tom," I said, turning back, "do you know what crisis logistics actually is?" He hesitated. "Security, right? Guards, protocols, fences?" "No," I said. "It's about anticipating catastrophic, non-linear failure. It's about understanding the 5 pressure points where systems collapse: industrial, financial, personal, the places where small assumptions become large consequences." I leaned against the counter, watching his shoulders tighten. "And what are they?" he asked. "Ego, hubris, inaccurate data, misplaced confidence." I paused, took a slow sip of coffee. "And finally, believing you're the smartest person in the room." The silence that followed was heavy, tangible. Tom filled it poorly, scrambling into a monologue about his firm's pro bono work, his dedication to ethical compliance, his long hours. Words poured out, unanchored, an attempt to reassert control. "That's wonderful, Tom," I said, cutting him off with a small wave. "But I have to go. I have a late call tonight, an obsolete call. Don't worry about the casserole. Leave it on the counter." He left quickly. Too quickly. His concern had fractured, replaced by something less comfortable. He didn't know why, but he knew the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he'd believed. He thought he was managing an aging man. He didn't realize he had just brushed against the outer edge of a professional shutdown. I confirmed the final schedule for the unannounced drill before midnight. 72 hours. The core simulation would involve a coordinated security breach and physical lockdown of the industrial complex adjacent to the East Wing. Power fluctuations, access denial, contractor accountability checks, everything legal, everything documented, everything deniable until it wasn't. The first rehook was already in place. Tom left my house carrying an unease he couldn't name, a sense that their narrative had a flaw he couldn't quite locate. I needed them confident. I needed them dismissive. I needed them exactly where they were. I waited, and the waiting this time had an end date. The East Wing expansion at St. Jude's was a hive of controlled chaos, the kind that only exists when money, reputation, and deadlines intersect. Polished steel beams rose beside unfinished concrete. Glass walls reflected coils of exposed conduit, and the air carried the mixed scent of dust, ozone, and fresh insulation. It was a place in transition, neither finished nor raw, and therefore vulnerable. Transitional spaces always are. I moved through the site wearing a reflective vest and a hard hat, my posture unremarkable, my expression deliberately neutral. I didn't rush. I didn't linger. I matched the pace of the environment. On the master access log, I appeared as HN Consulting, Site Logistics Coordinator. No title beyond that. No biography. The initials stood for Hale Nathan, but no one bothered to check. People rarely question what fits cleanly into an existing system. They assume someone else already has. Crews passed me without a second glance. A foreman nodded once. A safety officer waved me through a temporary barrier. The badge clipped to my vest opened every door it touched. Authority, I had learned long ago, is most effective when it doesn't announce itself. Evan and Rebecca were scheduled to host a brief investor walkthrough that morning, a carefully staged tour of the new atrium that would anchor the East Wing. It was designed to impress, glass soaring upward in clean lines, sunlight pouring through a partially installed skylight, banners draped with renderings of the final vision. Evan would talk about innovation, integration, future-proofing. Rebecca would smile, network, make mental notes about who mattered and who didn't. It was meant to solidify Evan's reputation as a man building something permanent, which made it the perfect moment to introduce friction. I was officially assigned to the subterranean parking structure, checking the integrity of the perimeter access points as part of the broader stress test protocol. Unofficially, I was there because parking structures reveal everything people don't think anyone is watching. The space was cavernous, damp in places, sound carrying farther than people expect. High-end construction vehicles sat in neat rows, their surfaces spotless, more showroom than workhorse. I heard the voices before I saw them, echoing, sharp. "I just need you to look professional, Rebecca," Evan hissed. His voice bounced off the concrete, stripped of its usual polish. "Stop talking about the guardianship paperwork. If Dad ever finds out we're even contemplating it, it's a disaster." Rebecca's reply came fast, impatient. "Contemplating? We filed the preliminary application, Evan. And why are you so worried? He's clearly losing it. He asked Tom about structural collapse, like he was some kind of movie villain. The man's in a fog." Evan swore under his breath. I could picture the gesture without seeing it. "I just don't like it. He was too calm when Tom saw him. It felt wrong, like a trap." "A trap?" Rebecca scoffed. The sound carried contempt effortlessly. "He's 52 and wears ugly sweaters. Calm just means he's checked out. Get over yourself and go sell the atrium." There was the slam of a car door, the sound sharp and final. Evan rounded the SUV, jaw tight, shoulders squared, rehearsing the man he needed to be upstairs. That was when he saw me. I stood near a concrete column, clipboard in hand, reviewing a checklist. Everything about me screamed utility. Necessary. Boring. Exactly the kind of person executives ignore unless something goes wrong. His reaction was immediate and unfiltered. Shock first, raw, unguarded. Then the color rose in his face, anger rushing in to fill the gap where control had slipped. "Dad, what the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, striding toward me. His voice was loud enough to carry, already performing for an audience that wasn't there yet. Rebecca emerged from the SUV, heels clicking, her expression shifting from irritation to alarm as she registered the scene. "Checking the P4 access protocol," I replied without looking up, my tone clipped and professional. "It's part of the new security overhaul." Evan stopped short, 2 feet away, close enough that I could see the fine tremor in his hands. "This is my project, our firm. You don't belong here. No security contractor is authorized to wander around unsupervised." I finally met his eyes. "I am the security contractor, or more accurately, the coordinator. The hospital contracted HN Consulting. I have full site access." He laughed, a brittle sound, disbelief curdling into contempt. "HN Consulting? That's a joke. You haven't handled a contract this size in years. This is pathetic. You're trying to sneak in and embarrass me." "I don't need to sneak," I said evenly. "I control the temporary security protocol for the entire complex. You should review the Master Compliance Manifest. It was updated at Euro 600. He didn't check. He couldn't. The realization that he might be wrong, that the ground beneath his authority might be unstable, pushed him past calculation and into impulse. "You know what?" he growled, grabbing the front of my vest and yanking me forward. His grip was tight, angry, careless. "You're leaving. Right now. Before I call actual security and have you—" He didn't finish the sentence. I didn't strike him. Striking is emotional. It escalates in unpredictable ways. This was neither personal nor chaotic. It was procedural. His grip on my vest created a perfect leverage point. My left hand secured his elbow, locking the joint. My right hand applied precise pressure to the distal articulation of his wrist, rotating it just enough. It was a textbook restraint, non-lethal, efficient. Something I'd demonstrated dozens of times in fluorescent-lit training rooms to bored men who thought they'd never need it. Evan went rigid, a sharp sound tearing from his throat before he could suppress it. The pain wasn't theatrical. It didn't need to be. It was absolute. His fingers released instantly. I guided his elbow upward, rotated the wrist outward, and let gravity do the rest. He dropped to his knees, momentum carrying him forward until his forehead hovered inches from the concrete. He was immobilized, his own anatomy working against him. Any attempt to resist would only worsen the outcome. Rebecca screamed, the sound high and panicked, echoing violently. "Evan! What are you doing? Let him go!" I looked down at my son, successful, ambitious, utterly unprepared for this moment, held in place by nothing more than physics and my so-called obsolete training. "First rule of logistics," I said quietly, my voice steady in the echoing space. "Don't apply unnecessary force, and never underestimate the subject of your operation." I released him immediately. No flourish, no lingering. Evan collapsed onto his hands and knees, clutching his wrist, breath coming in uneven gasps. When he looked up, the expression on his face wasn't anger. It was shock, the kind that rewrites internal hierarchies in an instant. "The work isn't obsolete," I added, adjusting my hard hat. "You just assumed I was?" I turned and walked away, my steps unhurried back toward the service elevator. Behind me, Rebecca hovered uselessly, her carefully curated world momentarily cracked open. Evan remained on the concrete, absorbing the recalibration. The effect was immediate and precise. He wasn't bruised, he wasn't injured. But the image he had relied on, the frail, manageable father, was gone. Replaced by something he didn't understand and couldn't control. I returned to my off-site command center without incident. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the familiar clarity that follows decisive action. The physical boundary had been established. Not dominance, authority, the kind that doesn't need to be repeated. I sat down, logged into the communication console, and reviewed the timeline. The unannounced emergency drill was 48 hours out. Systems were primed, personnel lists finalized, overrides tested. The countdown had started, and this time, there would be no polite laughter to cushion the impact. The physical confrontation with Evan had served its purpose. It had shifted the power dynamic from pity to fear. Evan was now frantic, texting Lila, Tom, and Rebecca in a panicked chain of messages that were all conveniently flowing through my system. "Evan, he's here. I'm telling you, he's in charge of security. He hurt me. He knows about the paperwork. We're screwed." Lila, "Stop being dramatic. Did you call the police?" Evan, "No, he just twisted my arm. He's not Dad, Lila. He's something else. We have to shut him down before the investor meeting." Tom, to Lila, "Don't panic. The guardianship application is still pending. We just need to accelerate the concern narrative. We need him flagged by site security as mentally unstable." I smiled, a thin, satisfied curl of the lip, misplaced confidence. They were doubling down on the lie just as I was about to enforce the reality. My next move was to inject controlled chaos. The high-profile investor walkthrough was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next morning. I needed to isolate Lila and Tom, who were attending to support Evan's narrative of stability. I used my contract authority to quietly disable their keycard access to the main East Wing elevators, citing a scheduled system update. I knew Lila would use the grand, central, visible stairwell, always focused on image and dramatic entrances. I placed a call to the main facility manager, feigning technical ignorance. "We have a security glitch," I told him calmly. "I need you to confirm that the P4P1 access staircase is the only viable route to the atrium for the next 30 minutes. Due to a pressure sensor error, I'm sending a technician to check it." I was the technician. I waited outside the entrance to the massive 5-story concrete stairwell, a functional artery designed for emergency evacuation, not polite ascent. I was dressed identically to the day before, plain, nondescript. I wore heavy boots and carried only my secure phone. Lila and Tom appeared 15 minutes later, dressed in expensive business attire, already annoyed by the elevator closure. "This is absurd," Lila muttered, her polished facade cracking. "We're going to be late. Evan is going to lose his mind." Tom, ever the quiet opportunist, looked nervous. "It's fine, honey. A little exercise." They entered the stairwell. I waited 10 seconds and followed them, moving with a silent, purposeful stride that belied my age. I caught up to them on the 3rd-floor landing. Lila was already breathing heavily, her face showing the strain of unaccustomed physical exertion. "Lila," I said, my voice cutting through the echo. They both spun around, startled. The look on their faces was priceless, a mix of guilt and professional dread. "Dad, what are you doing following us?" Lila demanded, recovering quickly, reaching for the familiar indignation. "We are on a strict schedule, coordinating a billion-dollar investment." "You're not coordinating anything," I replied. "I am. I'm coordinating an internal facility audit, specifically focused on personnel response time to an active breach." Tom stepped forward, planting his feet, trying to project authority. "Nathan, you need to step away. This is harassment. We will call the police." "You won't," I said, moving past Tom and placing my hand lightly on the cold steel railing. "Because this isn't harassment. It's a chase." Lila gasped, finally understanding the shift in the game. This wasn't a philosophical argument in a country club. This was a physical assessment in an industrial site. "You're not authorized to be here," Tom shouted, trying to stop me. I ignored him, using the environment. I used the railing as a pivot point and took the next 2 flights of stairs in a calculated, controlled run. Not fast, but constant. The chase was less about speed and more about pace and control. I was moving with the purpose of a man familiar with emergency protocols. They were moving with the panic of people whose routine had been violently interrupted. They scrambled after me, their expensive shoes slipping on the concrete, their breathing labored. "Stop it, Dad!" Lila yelled, her voice echoing wildly. "This is insane!" I reached the 5th floor, the access door to the atrium, and I used my master key card, the one that superseded every other card, to lock it from the outside. A cold, hard clack echoed down the stairwell. I stood there waiting, perfectly still, my breathing barely elevated. Lila arrived first, slamming her hand on the locked door, panic washing away the polished veneer. Tom stumbled in behind her, sweating, his face pale. "It's locked!" Lila shrieked, frantically swiping her key card, which returned a blinking red light. "The meeting! Evan is waiting!" "The meeting will have to wait," I said, stepping closer. I looked at Lila's manicured hands, which had signed the preliminary guardianship papers. "2 key lessons, children," I said calmly. 1. Never confuse access with authority. Your cards grant you access. My contract gives me authority. I paused, letting them absorb the shock. 2. In a crisis, the person who moves with the most efficiency, who uses the environment, not violence, always wins the ground game. You are panicked, I am not. Lila started to cry, a performative breakdown that quickly turned into genuine fear. "What do you want? Money will give it to you." "I want compliance," I said, my eyes hard. Compliance with the reality you created. I checked my watch. The investor meeting was already underway in the atrium, Evan sweating through his presentation. His star was about to be eclipsed by a mandatory, sudden, and highly visible emergency. "Enjoy the stairwell," I told them. "You're getting a preview of the lockdown." I took a side door that led to the industrial site's roof access, moving smoothly, disappearing into the maze of pipes and venting fans. I had achieved the sudden physical movement and the power shift. They were trapped, isolated, and publicly failing to meet their obligations. The next step was to expose the structural rot they had engineered. I reached the emergency coordination room overlooking the industrial complex, a glass-walled observation post that allowed me to view the entire East Wing construction site, including the atrium where the investor meeting was taking place. The meeting was happening directly below me. I watched Evan through the massive tinted windows. He was nervous, gesturing wildly, trying to salvage his presentation while his sister and her husband were missing, a clear sign of a disorganized team. I powered up the command center's comms and video link. My hands, though 52, were steady as I accessed the central PA system for the East Wing. This was all legal. It was a pre-scheduled, unannounced emergency drill, and I had the authority to implement it. I waited until Evan hit a high point in his presentation, citing the project's flawless logistical management. I pressed the transmit button. A loud, piercing tone echoed through the East Wing atrium, cutting off Evan mid-sentence. My voice, calm and utterly professional, boomed through the speakers, overriding all internal communications. "Attention, St. Jude's East Wing personnel. This is Nathan Hale, Site Logistics Coordinator. This facility is now entering Phase 1 of an unannounced, mandatory industrial shutdown and security audit. I repeat, this is a Phase 1 lockdown." The room below erupted into confusion. Investors looked around nervously. Evan's face, visible through the glass, went instantly slack with professional terror. "All non-essential personnel are to proceed to designated evacuation points," my voice continued, perfectly modulated. "Personnel with Level 3 and above security clearance, including principal contractors and developers, are to remain at their current location and submit to a mandatory system check. Your credentials must be verified immediately." Evan rushed to the phone, presumably to call the facility manager and override me. He couldn't. I had rerouted all external calls to my secure center. I watched him panic, trying to regain control. This was where the social collapse began. A hospital security supervisor, a man named Miller, walked briskly to Evan's side. "Mr. Hale, the coordinator is demanding immediate credential verification. We need your access logs and personnel profile, including emergency contact roles." Evan stammered, "This is a mistake. I know the coordinator. He paused, realizing he couldn't call me mentally unstable in front of his biggest investors. "I need your logs, sir," Miller repeated, his voice firm. Evan reluctantly handed over his keycard and profile. I had already flagged his profile for non-compliance and potential security risk, based on the prior day's unauthorized physical altercation, which I had filed a clean professional report on. I spoke into the microphone, addressing the room, but my words were for the investors and contractors who valued reliability and reputation above all else. The integrity of this facility relies on reliable personnel and clear emergency contact chains, I stated. We have identified several critical personnel whose emergency roles and contact status have been recently and sloppily altered. This is a red flag for system integrity. Evan's eyes widened. He knew what I was referencing: the removal of my name from his emergency contacts, the quiet isolation they had attempted. "I am now going to read an excerpt from a legitimate meeting transcript concerning the reliability of one of the principal contractors," I announced. I paused, letting the silence stretch, then I hit play. It wasn't my voice. It was the clinical, recorded audio from the preliminary guardianship meeting, the one Lila and Tom had orchestrated. Lila, audio. He's currently non-compliant with basic asset management protocol. He seems to be losing touch with reality. We need to transition the assets now to manage the risk. Tom, audio. The problem is his stability. We should consider a formal guardianship review. It's for his own good, of course. The audio was clear, short, and absolutely devastating. Evan looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The investors, who depended on the absolute stability of their partners, were hearing Evan's family call him mentally unstable and seeking to strip him of control. I added the finishing touch. Rebecca's gossip. I played a snippet from the intercepted message traffic. Rebecca, audio clipped. Can't wait until the guardianship is formalized and we can quietly manage his wardrobe. The investors looked at Evan. They weren't hearing gossip. They were hearing internal strife, manipulation, and the deliberate use of legal channels to seize control, all while touting flawless logistical management. The reputation fractured in minutes. In the stairwell, I could hear Lila and Tom pounding on the locked door, realizing the transcript was their voices, their words, now public and damning. They were exposed as unreliable, opportunistic, and willing to use manipulation for financial gain. I pressed the transmit button again. In light of these documented concerns regarding professional and personal reliability, all personnel profiles involved in the recent unauthorized alteration of emergency contact protocol, Evan Hale, Lila Hale, Tom Whitaker, and Rebecca Moore, are hereby stripped of Level 3 clearance and are designated as unreliable, requiring immediate, unescorted removal from the site. This is effective immediately. I had done it. No fraud. Everything was through contract authority, emergency protocol, and legitimate meeting transcripts. I had weaponized their own narrative against them. The spouses, dependent on Evan and Lila, were already turning. I saw an investor lean over and whisper to a partner, then both stood up, pointedly gathering their materials and walking away from Evan, whose face was a mask of utter defeat. The side comments, the laughs, were now silence. The reputation was destroyed. The emergency coordination room was quiet, save for the low hum of the monitors. Down below, site security, now following my explicit contractual orders, was escorting a furious and defeated Evan and a tearful Rebecca off the site. I tracked Lila and Tom still trapped in the stairwell. I needed them to think they were out of options, cornered and defeated by my professional competence. I unlocked the stairwell door. Lila and Tom stumbled into the hallway, disheveled and frantic. Lila's silk dress was crumpled. Tom's shirt was sweated through. They saw the security personnel leading Evan away in the distance. The reality of their collapse hit them instantly. They didn't come after me. They knew, physically and reputationally, that I was untouchable on this site. I left the coordination room and met them in a neutral hallway, near a fire extinguisher. "The guardianship attempt," I said simply. "Tell me about it." Lila tried to recover. "Dad, listen, it was Tom's idea. It was just a way to protect your assets. We heard you were having memory issues." "Stop it, Lila," I cut her off. My voice was calm, but the menace was heavy. "Tell me the truth, or I will initiate a full-scale private sector audit of all your leveraged assets, citing unreliable management history." Tom broke first, the quiet opportunist collapsing under genuine pressure. "It was our idea, Nathan, all of us. We needed the capital for this project. We saw an opportunity. You were just in the way." "We thought you were obsolete," Lila whispered, tears streaming down her face, now genuine and ugly. "We thought you wouldn't notice a few access code changes. We thought you were harmless." I let the insult hang in the air. "You were correct," I said. "I was harmless, until you used your concern to petition a court to strip me of my rights." I took a breath. This was the moment for the twist. "You filed the preliminary paperwork in late June," I said, my voice low and even. "I know this because I found the documentation you carelessly left in a shared digital folder on June 28th. Months ago." Their faces froze in identical masks of shock. "You..." You knew? Tom stammered. I knew, I confirmed. I found it. I read the insults. I saw the signatures. I walked closer to Lila, forcing her to look up at me. And then I waited. I didn't confront you. I didn't send a letter from a lawyer. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a menacing whisper. I waited until you were utterly confident. Until your professional life, your marriage, and your financial leverage were all resting on the success of this building. I needed you to believe I was slow, irrelevant, and out of the game. I straightened up. I needed the confidence to be maximum. I needed the collapse to be maximum. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The entire crisis, the contracts, the timing, it was all a setup orchestrated over months, using their own hubris as the bait. I hadn't reacted to their betrayal. I had integrated it into a larger professional operation. Now you understand the definition of crisis logistics, I said. It's about anticipating catastrophic failure and positioning your assets. Lila tried one last desperate move. You can't do this. We're your children. You forfeited that claim when you tried to strip me of my name and my rights using a fabricated lie, I replied, the coldness absolute. You betrayed me procedurally. I am extracting my revenge procedurally. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my primary phone, the secure one. I clicked a single button. This is the cliffhanger. Hook number 2, I announced. I have just triggered the final contingency. It's irreversible, but entirely legal. I had contacted the private equity firm funding Evan's company. I didn't mention the betrayal or the family fight. I simply sent them a copy of my official, notarized report filed with St. Jude's Security Trust. The report cited critical structural instability in the East Wing's contractor compliance chain, specifically naming Nathan Hale's firm as unreliable and high risk, based on the documented internal power struggle and the public humiliation of the security audit. The financial dominoes would start falling within the hour. No jail time, no IRS audit, just the instant and permanent destruction of their professional credit and reputation. I turned and walked away. The clock had run out. The next few hours were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. My team, who had been on standby, moved in to take over the site in a completely professional, seamless transition. This was the active industrial site setting, the backdrop for the final reckoning. The weather had turned. A cold rain hammered against the windows of the now secured coordination room. Outside, sirens wailed, not police, but official emergency response units I had contracted, citing the need for enhanced security presence during a compliance failure. I stood by the glass, watching the yellow reflective vests of my team replace the suits of Evan's staff. Lila and Tom were still on site, now held in a small, windowless temporary office under a security guard, not as prisoners, but as non-compliant personnel pending final release protocol. Their phones were confiscated under the guise of site-wide communication lockdown. I walked into the room. A single bare bulb illuminated their defeat. Lila was slumped in a plastic chair, tears having dried into streaks on her cheeks. Tom was pacing, muttering about contacting their lawyers, a useless gesture, as every step I had taken was legally sound and contractually mandated. You can't do this, Nathan, Lila said, her voice hoarse. You can't destroy us over a building contract. I'm not destroying you over a contract, I corrected her, leaning against the doorframe, my voice flat. I'm enforcing the procedural consequences of your betrayal. You chose a high-leverage public asset as the place to execute your plan. I simply treated it as a high-risk logistics failure. What about Evan? Tom asked, his voice shaking. You can't just let his company collapse. It's already collapsing, Tom, I replied. The private equity firm received my compliance report. Their due diligence team is already in the process of pulling the financing for the East Wing. They don't care about guardianship. They care about stability. You proved, on tape and in front of key investors, that your principal contractor is unreliable and subject to familial blackmail. That's catastrophic risk. I walked over to Lila's chair. You told me I was obsolete. You said my work was outdated. Crisis logistics is about creating consequence where others see none. I picked up the security guard's radio. I need Evan Hale brought back to the site, now, unescorted. 10 minutes later, Evan walked in. He looked broken. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and the defeat was absolute. He had seen the financial news headlines starting to break on his phone. St. Jude's East Wing financing pulled amid security concerns. This was the final action sequence, peak. He looked at me, no longer with anger, but with a desperate, childish plea. Dad, he choked out. Please, I'll undo the guardianship. I'll give you everything back. Just stop this. My career. It's everything. Rebecca is already calling her lawyer to draft divorce papers, citing financial ruin and professional negligence. I interrupted him, having read her final, desperate, intercepted text message to a friend. She was image-obsessed, Evan. You're no longer the image she needs. Evan sank against the wall, his head in his hands. Lila scrambled to his side. He doesn't mean it, Evan. He's just trying to scare us. I took a final decisive step into the room, bringing the situation to its head. I looked at the four of them, the children and their enablers. They were stripped of access, authority, and reputation. You wanted to isolate me socially, I said, my voice rising slightly for the first time, not in anger, but in cold finality. I have isolated you professionally. You tried to force a guardianship review. I have forced a financial review. I pointed to Lila. Your investment is worthless. The bond is being downgraded by the hour. I pointed to Tom. Your legal compliance firm is now officially blacklisted from all private security contracts in the region. You were deemed complicit in high-risk governance failure. I pointed to Evan. Your firm is insolvent. You lose the building, the reputation, and the life you spent a decade building. Evan lifted his head, his eyes vacant. What about the family? What about Mom? She wouldn't want this. She would have filed the papers correctly, I said, the driest sarcasm possible. I walked to the door, opening it and letting the sound of the rain and the sirens flood the small room. This is the end of the Hale family structure as you knew it, I declared. You removed me from your emergency contact roles. I have removed you from my life. I looked at all four of them, held captive by their own professional downfall. You are no longer my children, I said. You are just unreliable contractors. I turned to the guard outside. Process their final release. Escort them off the site. No personal belongings will be returned until a full forensic audit is completed. I walked out of the room, leaving them stripped of everything, including each other. Evan begging, Lila threatening, Tom silent, defeated. I didn't look back. The rain intensified, matching the storm that had broken inside the Hale family. I was back in the sterile, windowless command room. The work of securing the site was ongoing, a meticulous professional process that had no emotional connection to the family tragedy I had just engineered. I pulled up the latest financial reports. Evan's firm was officially placed under an emergency administrative review, the first step toward dissolution. Lila's leveraged bonds had been labeled junk status by 3 major analysts. The collateral they had used to finance the failed project was forfeit. I felt nothing. No elation, no regret. Just the professional satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. The emotional beat of the story was this. The father stays calm, accepting his role as the necessary villain. I got a call on the secure line. It was Harrison, my contact from the private security trust. Nathan, he said, sounding impressed. That was the most seamless absolute system failure I have ever seen. The way you leveraged the personal dynamics, genius. You exposed the entire weak point of their compliance chain. It was necessary, I replied simply. A system must be tested to failure to be made secure. And your son? My son, I said, looking out at the chaotic, rain-slicked industrial complex, failed the test. His ego was the structural flaw. I disconnected the call. The process was what mattered now. The cleanup, the paperwork, the legal defense against any frivolous suits, all of it was covered by my contract. I was untouchable. I reviewed the last piece of documentation, the final certified copy of the family cottage deed. They thought they had redirected my access. They were correct. But months ago, after I first discovered their betrayal, I had utilized my network to execute an entirely legal, if complex, maneuver. The cottage property wasn't just jointly owned. It sat on a piece of land that was classified as an industrial safety buffer for an adjacent utilities complex. I had used a shell corporation, one that was entirely legitimate and listed as a subsidiary of HN Consulting, to quietly purchase the long-dormant subsurface rights to the land beneath the cottage. This was the final devastating reveal. The cottage was physically intact, but legally untenable. I pulled up the latest email. It was from Lila's lawyer, attempting to dispute the professional ruin. Lawyer: Mr. Hale, your recent actions on the St. Jude site are grounds for severe legal action. We demand an immediate cessation of the asset review. Furthermore, my client, Lila Hale, demands access to the family cottage, which she legally co-owns. I drafted my response, short, procedural, and final. 2. Lawyer's email, from Nathan Hale, HN Consulting subject, RE Hale Family Assets and Compliance Counsel. The facility review stands. The financial collapse is a consequence of your client's documented professional unreliability. Regarding the cottage, I am now the legal holder of the property's subsurface rights. As of 15 today, I have activated the Industrial Safety Zone Protocol for the site. This protocol is mandated by the municipal utility and supersedes all surface-level residential claims. Your client technically still owns the cottage structure. However, the property is now permanently designated as an untenable commercial safety zone. Access is prohibited. No construction, no occupancy, no sale is possible. Your clients co-own a cabin they cannot enter, sit on land they cannot access, and which has zero market value. Procedurally yours, Nathan Hale. I hit send. That was the final blow to their personal assets, done with perfect legality and surgical precision. They lost the home, the memory, and the financial value, all without a single illegal act on my part. They lost everything. The industrial sirens had stopped. The rain had settled into a steady, persistent drizzle. I was alone in the command room, the screens now showing only compliance manifests and security logs. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a profound, cold stillness. My revenge was complete. It wasn't emotional, it was procedural, reputational, and physical, non-lethal. I leaned back in the chair, running a hand over my tired face. I had accepted the role of the villain. There was no redemption arc needed. I had secured my life against a hostile takeover attempt, using the precise language and mechanisms they had tried to use against me. I pulled out the preliminary guardianship petition, the one I had waited months to act on. The paper was crisp, the legal language dry. I stared at Lila's signature, at the word non-compliant used to describe me. I pulled out a lighter, one I hadn't used in years. It was a silver Zippo, a gift from my late wife, engraved with a meaningless corporate logo. I held the document over the plastic trash can. The paper caught quickly, curling into black ash. I watched it burn, the acrid smoke smelling faintly of betrayal. I imagined Evan, Lila, Tom, and Rebecca. They were scattered now, facing the immediate, brutal reality of their lives. Loss of reputation, loss of capital, loss of their social standing, and, most devastatingly, the loss of the narrative they had constructed for themselves. They were no longer the successful, relevant children. They were the failed contractors. The final element of the retention system was the abrupt end. No reflection, no moralizing. The consequence must be the story's final word. I received one final, unexpected message on the secure line. It was an email, sent to my personal account from an anonymous encrypted service. The subject line was just a single word: Dad. I opened the email. It contained only a short line of text, no signature. You were right. We thought you were harmless. You just taught us what compliance truly means. I stared at the screen, a flicker of something, not warmth, but recognition, crossing my face. It was Evan. It had to be. A final, terrified acknowledgement of the chasm between their perception and the lethal reality of my capabilities. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The lesson had been administered. The collapse was total. The illusion of family was forever shattered. I stood up, pulling on my plain jacket. My job here was done. The logistics were complete. The crisis was resolved. I walked to the main door of the coordination room. Outside, the rain was a sheet of water over the industrial complex. I could hear the last of the contracted security teams clearing the final perimeter. I took one last look at the screens, all green, all stable, all mine. The professional threat had been neutralized with surgical efficiency. I stepped out of the room, into the damp, cold corridor, moving toward the exit, toward my new, quiet life, unburdened by false affection or treacherous ambition. I pushed the heavy steel door open and walked into the rain. I reached the edge of the industrial park, where the asphalt ended and the open road began. The private car I had arranged for was waiting, discreet and black. I stopped, looking back at the massive, skeletal frame of the East Wing expansion, the monument to their failure and my victory. It was dark, silent, and entirely under my control. I opened the car door, pausing before I got in. My work was complete. I had followed every rule, executed every sequence. The father got his revenge. The story had reached its highest emotional note, the moment of total, professional, and personal destruction of the antagonists. My moral position was clear. I had crossed the line, and I accepted the cost. There was no going back. I slid into the leather seat. I gave the driver the address, a temporary, safe location hundreds of miles away, where I could begin my next genuinely quiet life, free of the burdens of family. I closed the door. The sound was a heavy, final thud. I leaned back, feeling the vibration of the engine beneath me. The image of Evan's face, crumpled in defeat, and Lila's eyes, wide with sheer terror, flashed in my mind. It was procedural. It had to be. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the industrial sirens and the cold rain behind. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the tires on the wet road. It was a lonely sound, but it was mine. I had done what needed to be done. I had destroyed the illusion of family forever.